The call is now to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I rise in this chamber tonight to discuss and to talk about the very important India-Australian relationship, a relationship between Australia, the oldest and most stable democracy in the Asian region, and India, the world's biggest democracy. I also want to highlight how Australia has been enriched by Indian migrants to Australia, and to discuss and to point out a long-running grievance that both India and the Indian people have shared for many years, and that is their lack of success in gaining a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Deputy Speaker, the 21st century is shaping to be the Asian century. Both Australia and India are growing economies located in the Indian Ocean Rim, which is home to more than 2.6 billion people, almost 40% of the world's population. According to 2011 modelling by the Asian Development Bank, Asia's GDP would increase from $17 trillion in 2010 to $174 trillion in 2050, or half the global GDP. India and Australia are positioned to benefit from this extraordinary growth. In Australia, there is a rapidly growing Indian community. This is certainly true in my electorate of Holt. According to the 2011 census, approximately 295,000 people living in Australia were born in India, and there are about 390,000 people of Indian ancestry. In 2011, those migrating for India were the largest source of permanent migration to Australia, forming 15.7% of the total migration program in 2011-2012, whilst according to the 2011 census, there were 11,116 people of Indian ancestry residing in my federal electorate of Holt. Deputy Speaker, Indian migrants have made a profound contribution to Australia. We see the contribution that the Indian community make in so many forms, be it in the fields of science or medicine or law or other fields. You also see the richness and the vibrancy of the culture and their culture in festivals like the Holi Festival at the Carrum Downs Temple, or the Diwali Festival, the Festival of Lights, which is coming soon, which will be held this Saturday at the same temple. And I celebrate those events with the community at this temple, which is called the Sri Shiva Vishnu Temple in Carrum Downs. It's an exquisite, almost iconic temple, and one that attracts many, many visitors from all over the world, actually. Now, today, India and its 1.25 billion citizens can no longer be described as a middle power. Rather, on any objective assessment, it's on the threshold of gaining substantial power status, and the international community is recognising this. It is clear that India's size and global importance justify a place or a position where they are warranted recognition in the world of world politics. India is set to overtake China as the world's most populated country by about 2028. It is the world's biggest democracy. Its economy is the world's third largest in terms of GDP purchasing power parity. India is currently the world's third largest military spender in purchasing power parity terms, and this is growing significantly, with the country being the world's largest arms importer. India also has an independent capability to place satellites in orbit, including production of the necessary launch vehicle, as well as having one of its satellites reach and orbit Mars just last month. As a long-term leader amongst the developing world, India has consistently advocated for another equality-inspired focal point of the UN, global poverty alleviation. The country now is emerging as an aid donor itself. India is also one of the largest constant contributors of troops to the United Nations. Peacekeeping missions with more than 100,000 troops have served in UN missions during the past 50 years. Now, it's not just my confidence in India's growing power. That confidence is shared by US President Barack Obama, who stated in his address to the Indian Parliament in 2010 that, and I would mirror these sentiments, India's treasured past, a civilisation that has been shaping the world for thousands of years. Indians unlocked the intricacies of the human body and the vastness of our universe. It's no exaggeration to say that our information age is rooted in Indian innovations, including the number 0. Of course, India not only opened our minds, she expanded our moral imaginations with religious texts that still summon the faithful to lives of dignity and discipline, with poets who imagined a future where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, and with a man whose message of love and justice endures, the father of the Indian nation, Mahatma Gandhi. An ancient civilization of science and innovation, a fundamental faith in human progress, this is a sturdy foundation upon which you have built ever since that stroke of midnight when the tricolour was raised over a free and independent India. And despite the sceptics who said this country was simply too poor or too vast or too diverse to succeed, Indians surmounted overwhelming odds and became a model to the world. And this is still quoting President Obama. Instead of slipping into starvation, you launched the green revolution that fed millions. Instead of becoming dependent on commodities and export, you invested in science and technology, and in your greatest resource, the Indian people. And the world sees the results from the supercomputers you build to the Indian flag that you put on the moon. Instead of resisting the global economy, you became one of its engines, reforming the licensing Raj and unleashing an economic marvel that has lifted tens of millions of people from poverty and created one of the world's largest middle classes. Just as others, including the United States, supported Indian independence, India championed the self-determination of peoples from Africa to Asia as they too broke free from colonialism, and along with the United States, you've been a leader in supporting democratic development and civil society groups around the world, and this too is part of India's greatness, and that was from President Obama. It's interesting that we have a direct and profound linkage here in the Labor Party with the Indian community. John Ashmore Evert was born in Kanpur, India in 1851, just 6 years before the famous Indian rebellion against the British in that town. Eventually, Evert would move to Sydney and raise a family. It's unlikely he would have had any idea that the great heights his son, Herb Vere, would reach in the new country. HV Doc Evert, of course, went on to play a crucial role as Australia's representative in the establishment of the United Nations. Evert's relevance for our relationship with India is not only confined to his family history. More importantly, his achievements on the international front reveal a moral overlap between India and Australia, particularly under the Labor Party. Throughout the United Nations' lifetime, two of its greatest supporters have been India and Australia. This enthusiasm for multilateralism was no coincidence. It was a product of our shared interests. Another value shared by Australia, India and the UN is the equality in the international realm. India's first leaders had cut their political teeth fighting for equality and independence, a fight supported by Australia under Labor, Prime Minister Ben Chifley. This struggle fired India's support for a multilateral system which offered a more democratic and egalitarian model for international relations and the survival of the fittest thinking that led to 2 world wars. India enthusiastically supported the UN's role in doing away with the vestiges of colonialism and racial inequality in every corner of the world. This was particularly so in relation to apartheid in South Africa, a fight which had arguably led to the politicisation of Gandhi himself during his time there. Australia's Labor government under Hawke played a lead role amongst Western nations in applying the economic pressure, which helped to ultimately undo the repressive apartheid regime. Deputy Speaker, India occupies a unique position and weight and gives enormous weight to the Indo-Pacific region, our region, the new centre of world growth. India has been elected 7 times to the UN Security Council. It is not only the world's largest democracy, I've said, has the 3rd largest armed force, but also the world's largest Hindu nation and the world's 2nd largest Muslim nation. But an incongruity, Deputy Speaker, remains. And that is this large, emerging democratic power, the largest democracy on the earth, does not have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Now, I know that there's been some discussion, particularly led by my predecessor, Gareth Evans, about reforming the UN Security Council. But I would ask, in the shadow of Diwali, that magnificent festival that's going to be held very shortly, in fact this weekend, as I've said, at the Sri Shiva Vishnu Temple in Carrum Downs, that it might be time for the world community to seriously recognise India's unique and evolving role in the world architecture, the architecture of the United Nations, and set aside a place for it as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. I've laid before this place India's unique history, its unique place in the world, its growing substantive status in world affairs. It plays a key role in this emerging Asian era, and I would strongly urge that it be given a seat on the UN Security Council as a matter of priority.